The fourth generation BMW X5 arrived in 2018 after production began in August, with the first deliveries in the last quarter of the year. This X5 would get a new chassis, the CLAR or CLAR platform, that was shared with the BMW 7 Series and X7 model, making the standard model 3.5 centimeters or 1.4 inches longer in total. And while this newer model is actually slightly shorter in height than its predecessor, it is much wider. The width swells to just over 2 meters or 78.9 inches, a 2.5 inch or 6.4 centimeter increase, which is worth noting if you live in an area with narrow country lanes or a city that has width restrictions on certain roads joined to cycle lanes. If you are looking at buying a facelift model, you'll be looking for a car built from March 2023 onwards. BMW enthusiasts will know this as the LCI model, which updates the front end and changes the rear lights along with several minor tweaks across the car. The refresh also added mild hybrid options and extended the drivable battery range of existing hybrid models. Now, the X5 was not alone, and it was soon joined by an X5M model in 2019, followed by a long wheelbase model for select markets. The X5M is coded F95, the long wheelbase version is coded G18. For long-standing BMW fans, you may know that historically BMW would use the 7 Series model to showcase hydrogen technology, as they have done for decades by using combustible hydrogen in V12 models. These limited run cars were leased to a small number of consumers but remained BMW property. However, when the 7 Series lost its V12, BMW selected the X5 to showcase its new hydrogen technology. The iX5 did not use hydrogen in a combustion engine. Instead, it featured a fuel cell that would convert the potential energy of hydrogen into electricity to drive the wheels. This car has a possible range of 313 miles or 503 kilometers between fill-ups, but similar to the generation of 7 Series before it, these cars were more of a technical showcase of what BMW could do, and only 100 entered service for a select group of lease customers. As a little extra bit of detail though, you may know that the Toyota Supra and BMW Z4 share an engine, but the iX5 also shares tech with Toyota by using the Japanese firm's fuel cells. Now, for those of you that wanted a full EV version of this X5, it was talked about for a few years, but it is now confirmed that there is not going to be a full EV version. There is the plug-in hybrids though, and on the facelift they do get extended range, which we'll come on to later in the engine section. If you do want a full EV, you'll have to wait till the next generation model, expected to be first seen at the end of 2026. Depending on your country, specification will be slightly different. For many, there is the SE, then the Sport, then the X line, then the M Sport, and then there was an M Lite and a full M model. The selection is then narrowed to Sport or X line and then M Sport after to the 2023 update. Styling changes and interior seats are the most notable differences, but engine options and optional specification choice is more limited on entry model vehicles. Those looking for the highest power model of the X5M should note that after the facelift, the model lineup is also slimmed down to only offer the competition specification. Similar to the previous X5 models though, if speed is less important than safety, an armoured version was offered. It was mainly ordered by governments, and so protection is graded at VR6 to withstand automatic weapon fire, and the twin-turbo V8 engine meant that even with the weight gain, the car can still sprint to 62 miles per hour or 100 kilometers an hour in just under 6 seconds. Back to the regular car though, and in 2018 the X5 scored a full 5 stars at Euro NCAP safety testing, although this score has since expired due to new rules on safety assist technology. In 2022, North American IIHS scored the X5 as a top safety pick award after strong scores across testing in 2019. Moving on to the common faults, and a reminder to subscribe if you enjoy the video, as you never know what guide we may show next, and there's plenty to enjoy aside from the guides on the channel. We'll start with the weaknesses that become a common fault in the front arms. If you currently own a larger SUV or previous X5, this won't be a surprise, as the bushings do have a shorter lifespan on most SUVs, but the X5 puts additional stress from its engineering as an SUV that drives closer to a car than any larger SUV model. Any noticeable click or clunk on test drive, and you were looking at a fairly easy repair, but the arms aren't cheap, and so if possible, either work a replacement into the deal or some discount to help pay for a replacement. More concerning would be any sign of a transfer case failure, usually a shudder while driving. Some owners feel the staggered wheel contributes to this, but most are set up this way. Specialists tend to suggest that the X5 has a slightly higher report than transfer case failures, but compared to similar cars, it isn't exceptionally different. However, the 2019, 2020, and some 2021 cars did have a report of the incorrect oil from factory. Those that didn't have these changed did see problems, and this high level of reporting in those 2 years makes the car an outlier overall. If buying a 2020 or 2021, it is worth getting the transfer case and differentials serviced. One of the highest contributing factors was drivers running an X5 with a larger difference in tyre depth front to back. If the back tyres are worn more than 4mm more than the front tyres, then you should consider changing them all. It is more expensive to do this, but it will keep the all-wheel drive system within rolling tolerance between axles. Some suggest as little as 2mm difference in tyre wear. A costly repair is the oil filter housing, and so look out for any signs of oil spills, especially at the back of the six-cylinder engines. If the housing cracks, you will need a fairly cheap part, but a very expensive amount of labour to repair it, as the procedure to remove it includes removing the liquid-cooled intake manifold and fighting around in a tight space. It is a tough job, and it is priced accordingly by specialists. Now, air suspension at the rear does have some reports of failures. However, these are nowhere near as common as they were 20 years ago on luxury cars. So, for the most part, you shouldn't have a problem. But if you do see any squatting at the rear of the vehicle, then you should ask a few questions. And if you're not sure, it may well be worth walking away because it is quite an expensive repair. Software faults have been reported, but thankfully most were resolved in either reboots or updates. And while some sensors are more common than others to fail, there are too many environmental factors that form part of this for me to say that any one is more likely than the other. Ultimately, the owners that suffered with this worst were the ones using the car in harsh conditions, but several police forces used the X5 and hadn't suffered many issues with electronic failures, even after the tough miles they usually put on these cars, so it is less of a worry for potential buyers. On a test drive, it's best to find a quiet road and hover your hands over the steering wheel to check if the car holds a straight line. If it pulls in either direction or creaks, it may just be the tracking, as a seller will likely suggest. However, the steering column and racks have been reported as failures, and a telltale sign is pulling to one side or the other, and this is not a cheap repair, so if you're unsure, it is worth getting a specialist to guide you. When viewing a car, make sure to switch the lights to the on position, then return them to auto or off. You want to make sure that the lights do actually turn off, as some owners have reported lights remaining on even when the car had locked, and after the light assist function for seeing your driveway or local surroundings should have timed out. This was a tedious issue for the few that suffered it. I have to note that while this may appear like a long list of faults, the probability of faults on this generation X5 is actually lower than the previous generation models, and several owners have said this was the best BMW they had owned from a reliability standpoint, needing nothing but tyres, brakes, and regular servicing. Moving on to the recalls, and a reminder that there are both channel memberships and the Miles Driven book to check out if you'd like to support the channel. In 2019, there were recalls for airbags and seatbelts, alongside a smaller recall for the fuel pump and steering rack, the latter due to an initial issue with the rack pinion teeth that could break. In 2020, there were again a number of recalls for airbags on different chassis. A separate recall for both the auto transmission and tyres was limited to some initial reports from the factory of cars leaving outside of factory tolerance. A loose weld on the hybrid battery caused a small recall for hybrid models, and both front control arms were recalled on several X5 and X7s due to a weld from factory being possible to detach. In 2021, there was a recall. This was for the universal joint on the steering column. There was also a recall for brakes and for the airbags on a limited number of vehicles. Then in 2022, there was a recall for leaks on the windscreen and on the panoramic sunroof, but this was a fairly limited number of vehicles. 2023 and 2024 have a smaller number of recalls. Mainly the control modules for the transmission and stability control were paired to a seatbelt recall on some X5 models. Now onto the engines, and whilst used and new models are most popular in 6-cylinder, there is a smaller 2-litre and a larger V8 that initially has an X5 model until it becomes an X5M or M60 only. Let's start with the diesels though, and several markets won't have access to this generation X5. Whilst the highest power diesel, the X5 M50D, is only offered until 2020. The lowest power diesel is a 2-litre turbo diesel coded B47, which is named 25D, making 228 brake horsepower and averaging 52.3 miles per gallon or 5.4 litres per 100 kilometres on official testing. This is generally a hard-to-find model that was only popular in markets that had a tax incentive to buy a smaller engine. The 25D is sold in such a limited number that owner feedback is too small, so I'll say that the B48 engine is generally reliable and relatively simple to maintain. The 3-litre diesel coded B57 is the one most diesel buyers will be looking at. It is sold in a wide variation of single, twin and quad turbo between the 30D, 40D and M50D models. The entry is the 30D with 261 brake horsepower, which is then updated to 282 brake horsepower after the facelift. The 40D gets 335 brake horsepower until it's updated, when it's increased to 347 brake horsepower. And then the short-lived M50D model gets 394 brake horsepower. Official fuel economy for this one ranges between the power and year, along with the region, but in Europe it's rated at 39.2 miles per gallon, or 7.21 litres per 100 kilometres, which is stated against the 2023 X5 40D. After deep diving into this engine on several BMW models, it regularly is mentioned by owners as to being one of the best engines they have owned. Complaints are not unheard of, but the consistency is weak, showing that the majority of owners experience either a manufacturing issue needing dealer intervention or an owner-related issue that's rarely repeated. The one that does get repeated, though, is emissions equipment problems, especially as some owners that cover low mileage have issues with the particulate filters or electronic warnings associated with DPF not being able to regenerate. I did also manage to find some owners reporting fuel injectors failing or clogging and causing an engine management light, followed by an expensive repair. These appear to affect both well-kept low-mileage models and hard-driven high-milers. The root cause appears hard to pin down, but several owners mention the X5 is particularly susceptible to poor-quality diesel fuel, and contaminants may be less of an issue on some older diesel engines that were not so finely tuned for fuel economy and power with the lowest possible emissions like the newer X5 models. Onto the petrol engines, but a quick note that all diesel engines become mild hybrid after 2020. There is a low volume model which is aimed at a select market that benefits from small engine taxation benefits. This model is the 30i, fitted with a 2-litre B48 engine, making 261 brake horsepower. The engine has a good reputation in both the 3 Series and 5 Series, and is more commonly seen in the smaller BMW X3. Owner reports are limited, and so I'll only note that this engine is offered from 2019 and is tuned to deliver peak torque from just 1550 RPM. While there is little to say of the 2-litre, the 3-litre, coded B58, and seemingly collecting more and more fans as it proves itself not only to be powerful but dependable, the B58 is the one fitted to the Z4 and Supra, cars that tuners have pushed this engine to a 1000 brake horsepower in. The official rating of 25.2 miles per gallon, or 11.21 litres per 100 kilometres, is rarely achieved by most owners, although it's possible when on a long journey at consistent speed. Power is initially stated at 335 brake horsepower until it becomes a mild hybrid model, and power either remains officially rated the same or 375 brake horsepower. It is also worth noting that only a limited number of markets keep the 40i model after 2023. The USA is an exception, but all that does keep the 40i model, which is offered in both rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive going into the 2026 model year. Fuel economy is also boosted slightly in official testing after 2023, but owners still say that achieving 30 miles per gallon is rare and would need a steady long run. As I mentioned on the BMW X7 guide, the B58 is proving itself to be a very durable engine that is showing itself to be dependable as long as it is serviced on time. Some owners choose to tune the engine with aftermarket engine mapping, which the motor and gearbox appear to deal with well. Speaking of the gearbox, there have been stories of the X5 models having their mileage tampered with, and for one reason or another, 40i seems slightly more reported, although this is likely because online forums reflect the global supply of diesels, in that it is predominantly Europeans that still have the diesel model, while everyone gets the 40i. All of this is to say that if you view a car that appears more worn than the mileage would suggest, it is possible to get a scan of the gearbox mileage. This should almost perfectly align with the odometer. If it is way out, then the car has likely been clocked. I will stress this is rare though, but a good sense check if the car's interior looks rougher than you expect. I would note though that a handful of owners say the B58 can take huge mileage. The hybrid version of the X5 gets the 3-litre B58, same as the 40i. Both the 45e and 50e model will have a battery, and the 45e is merely the earlier model with combined power of 389 brake horsepower, and the 50e from 2023 jumps power to 483 brake horsepower. Range on the hybrid is 54 miles or 86 kilometers on the 45e, with the 50e getting 62 miles or 100 kilometers of possible driving range before needing a top-up. Looking at reports, these appear to have few reports of battery issues, although achieving the maximum range is quite tough, especially on cars now 3 to 5 years old, as the battery degrades slowly. These have increased in popularity quite a lot, especially in Europe between 2019 and 2025, as tax incentives due to tailpipe emissions promoted both the purchase and lease of plug-in hybrid models. The V8 comes in two flavours, the 50i model and then an M, which is the M50i and then M60i. For clarity, I am going to hold on to advising the M60i as its engine code is the same as the later X5M competition, so we'll cover it in a moment. The N63 engine fitted to the 50i has 456 brake horsepower, and the M50i has 523 brake horsepower, with an official WLTP average economy of 24.6 miles per gallon or 11.48 litres per 100 kilometres. The engine remains until 2023, when most markets then limit the X5 to beginning with a 6-cylinder petrol or diesel, then the hybrid, and then the highest power M60 V8 or the X5M. The main point to remember about the N63 engine is that while the internet is filled with horror stories of these engines, this generation X5 gets the late TU3 version of the motor, which irons out early issues, and to be fair to BMW, while this engine originally had lots of problems, BMW worked hard to rectify early faults. There have been some complaints of cooling pipe failures, but these were fairly limited to early cars that had the replacement parts fitted under warranty. The V8 though will cost more to run and maintain than the straight 6 or hybrids, and while it is faster than the 40i, the plug-in hybrids were more popular as they were good matches for performance while offering better fuel economy. The last V8 fitted to this generation X5 goes into the M60i, the X5M and X5M competition. The X5M and competition get the S63 variant until 2023. The S68 is equipped with mild hybrid and is fitted to the M60i and the facelift X5M competition. The X5M has 591 brake horsepower. The M60i matches the M50 for power with 523 brake horsepower, and the X5M competition has the same power whether it has the S63 or the S68 at 617 brake horsepower. Fuel economy varies across the performance models, but the M60i gets a WLTP standard of 24.4 miles per gallon or 11.58 litres per 100 kilometres. Of all the complaints, a battery drain issue is the minor but more common annoyance, with a bearing failure reports rare but worrying to have reported by a few owners. The problem fortunately happens fairly early on while the car is under warranty though. A fuel pump issue has been reported multiple times, although it appears that it's going to fail. It would have happened before 60,000 miles or 100,000 kilometers. Carbon cleaning is advised, but while there were issues with the highest power models, it appears most owners say that the biggest concern isn't actually the engine, and instead other issues like suspension, transmission, or electronics were a bigger annoyance and a more frequent cost. On the big plus side, when comparing the M60i and X5M against other high-performance SUVs, not only does the X5M score well in group tests, but owners find it to be more reliable than others. Moving on to our picks, and it's the 6-cylinder engines, either petrol or diesel, that are the winner for those that want a luxury SUV that drives closer to a larger estate car. If tax costs are crucial, then the hybrids are a great option, but for the high-budget picks, there are plenty of high-performance SUVs out there. However, the X5 is now several generations into its M-car variants, and all have put up a strong fight in the segment, filled with every manufacturer from Alfa Romeo to Volkswagen, but the X5M keeps performing well. If the X5 isn't quite big enough, then there is the recent video on the channel of the X7. We also have guides for the Range Rover, Audi Q7 and Porsche Cayenne, along with other large SUVs to check out next.